right, welcome everyone. Once again, thank you so much for being here. Buenas tardes a todos ustedes. Yo soy Alejandro Castillo, soy el director de la Oficina de Comunicaciones para la Comunidad Hispana. I'm the director of the Office for Hispanic Communications here in the Archdiocese of Chicago, and it's truly my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth presentation of our Hispanic Young Adult Professional Speaker Series. So thank you very much for making this already a success in my mind. Thank you. This series was created with one purpose in mind: to offer a space where young Hispanic professionals can be inspired, challenged, and connected. We want you to leave tonight with some new ideas, some new energy, and hopefully some new friends. After the presentation, Ray will answer a few questions. We'll have someone going around with a microphone to ask your questions live. We also have some postcards, so if you're a little shy, you can write them down and we'll read them off for you. And a reminder, when you entered, you received a raffle ticket, so please keep that handy. At the conclusion of our Q&A, we will raffle off 5 copies of Ray's newest book, We Are Home: Becoming American in the 21st Century, an Oral History. I just finished it a couple of days ago, so it was on my dresser for a while and I did it. By the way, when I met Ray a few months back at a conference, I told him I had the book on my dresser, and he looks at me and goes, "It's a good book." So I read it, and Ray, it's a good book. It's a good book. So for the rest of you, Ray will have copies available for sale, so you won't want to miss that. Now it's my distinct honor to introduce tonight's speaker. Ray Suarez is an acclaimed writer and broadcaster and an amazing storyteller. He is currently the host of the weekly Foreign Affairs radio program and podcast, On Shifting Ground. Over the course of his distinguished career, he has served as chief national correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, hosted NPR's Talk of the Nation, and reported from Chicago, Los Angeles, London, and Rome. He is the author of several notable books, including Latino Americans, The Old Neighborhood, and of course, his latest work, We Are Home. Tonight's presentation is Leading with Identity, Ray Suarez on faith, media, and professional success. In the brief time we have with him this evening, Ray will reflect on his personal and professional journey, exploring themes of Hispanic identity, representation in media, and the role of young professionals in shaping their communities as well. He will also touch on his faith story and the challenge of succeeding in today's world without losing sight of our values. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Ray Suarez.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And it's always fun for an old Hispanic professional to talk to young Hispanic professionals. I just signed a contract with a publisher to write a book about the future of the church in the United States. And just in the last couple of days, new data came out that showed that the United States has had one of the sharpest fall-offs, one of the sharpest drops in religious participation and religious belief of any wealthy country in the world. And it used to be that the United States was an exception among the countries, the wealthy industrial countries of the world, where churches are kind of museums and they're empty on Sundays. The United States wasn't like that. And it's interesting to consider the future of the church. So that's one of the things I'll be working on in the coming years. It is always a joy to be back in Chicago, a place that taught me a lot about being a reporter, a place where I got to participate and publicly celebrate the fascinating Latino community in this city, which is now what, about 40% of the population of the city. And my first Ash Wednesday here in Chicago, I said to my boss, you know, I'm going to go to church before work. Uh, if you don't want me to go on the air later with ashes on my forehead, that's okay. I'll just take them off. And he looked at me, and I think he was rolling it over in his head what that would look like on television. And he said to me, no, I mean, we're in Chicago, and after all, there are going to be a lot of people walking around with ashes on their head. And it just shows that we're a Chicago station and you're a Chicago guy, and go ahead. So I did, and it was not a big deal. And so for all the subsequent years that I was here, I did the same thing, and it was not a big deal. Many years later, I was working in national television for PBS's nightly newscast. And I thought, well, you know, probably better ask. So I said to my boss, look, you know, I'm going to go to church before I come to work. What do you think? Should I leave them on? Should I take them off? What do you think? And I think he was a little spooked about the prospect of having to tell me to take them off. So he hesitated, and he said, no, go ahead, just don't worry about it. Leave them on. Fascinating, the reaction it got. Because we got letters from all over the country saying, oh, how terrific. Bravo. You have a member of your staff who doesn't mind having a public profile as a Christian person. Good for you. But weirdly, there were also letters that came in that said, how dare you? How dare you have a member of your staff shoving their religion down my throat? Whoa. I had no idea that that's what I was doing. And it was the furthest thing from my mind, really, but it was a reminder that in 21st century America, religion can be political, being a public, open, not, you know, banging the drum or anything, just being who you are, can sometimes be complicated, or more complicated than you think about before you go ahead and you do it. The country has been through tremendous change. Think about your family's lives in the United States and how in so many ways they're representative of the changes that have been underway in the United States. Right now, 14% of the people in the country were born somewhere else on the planet. It hasn't been that high a percentage in over 100 years. 1910 was the last census when so many people were born elsewhere on the planet. And, you know, that's the time when a lot of the Catholic churches that ended up shaping the skyline of many of these neighborhoods that you see from the Kennedy or you see from the Ryan, that skyline was created during those years when Italians and Poles and down on the southeast side, Mexican families too, were building those churches that now are old, steady, reliable monuments of their Chicago neighborhoods. Before 1965, when the United States changed the rules, there were very few Buddhists, there were very few Hindus, there were very few Muslims in the United States. But then when the laws changed and people could come here from all different places in the world, we were also rapidly suburbanizing. And so people were moving out of ethnic ghettos, out to new communities, and, you know, get on the highway and go out to Olympia Fields, go out to Naperville, Go up to Glencoe. The churches there were not built by craftsmen from the old country or staffed by nuns that they sent away to come teach. They were representative of a new kind of America where religion was meant to be a little less showy. And a lot of us became religious free agents at that point. We could make up our own minds. We could make up our own ways of practice and our own ways of believing and our own ways of being members or not members of a religious organization in public. How public you wanted to be about your religious faith now became a matter of choice rather than something that, of course, everyone knew what you were and knew where you went because you saw the same people during your work day as you saw on Sunday, and your kids went to school with their kids. The world, America, daily life became far more dispersed. So suddenly, your parish church was no longer a 10-minute walk from your front door, as it was in so much of Chicago. Now it meant getting in the car and either driving back to the old neighborhood or increasingly not going at all. It's a free country. That's an available choice. People began to explore other ways of being a faithful person, free of the strictures, free of the rules, and free of the obligations of being a member of a congregation. Instead of it being something that you felt was imposed on you from the outside, I gotta do this because everybody knows me and I gotta do this. Now it was something that you decided for yourself, and it gave you, as developing adults, choices to make about how you were gonna shape your life week in and week out. Nobody was taking attendance. In a lot of these newer, larger, merged congregations, no one was going to miss you if you weren't there. There were no masses in any other language but English. You weren't suddenly sitting in the pews with people that you went K-12 with in school. You were able to make up your own life, at least in this part, as you went along. And if both parents in the household now had full-time jobs, Saturdays and Sundays became precious family time, but also filled with lots of errands that in a one full-time job household would get taken care of during the week. But now weekends became packed. All these changes, some big, some small, pressed on the church. People were losing faith, losing trust in institutions, losing trust in elected officials, in government, in criminal justice, in the news business, and began to declare, and I'm sure you've heard this, I make up my mind for myself. No one can tell me what to believe. The very idea of there being someone who could tell you what to believe would mean that you were surrendering your authority over yourself, surrendering your sovereignty to someone or something else. And that was rapidly becoming a less desirable and kind of less respectable way to be. People would say, how can they tell you what to believe? Who put them in charge of your life? And suddenly, being a religious person, and publicly so, didn't seem like such an attractive gig anymore. You were kind of admitting that, yeah, actually I do give a little bit of my sovereignty away. I surrender a bit of my total authority over myself to other forces in my life. At the same time, you'll turn on the television or pick up a magazine or a newspaper and find there's a loneliness epidemic. People are talking about people dying of loneliness. If you're a member of a congregation, that's the last thing that's going to happen to you. Because even if you decide you're not getting out of bed and you're not going into church, people worry about you. People look after you. When you're sick, they'll bring you a hot dish or leftovers from their own kitchen. They'll call you during the week. To be part of something else, instead of being a surrender of your authority over yourself, might be the way that we were really meant to live. It isn't as easy as it once was to find your people. Whatever that means to you, your people. It isn't as easy or as common to manage to hold together a tribe of friends over time. Men especially are finding it difficult to keep old friends and find new ones. So where does that leave you? What's the implication moving forward? What will you do with the freedom of choice that you might consider part of your inheritance as an American in the 21st century? What does it mean to belong? Are you comfortable with saying that actually, yes, you belong to somebody or something? Ask yourself right now, who do you belong to? And who belongs to you? Some of you may already have a spouse, and in a very fundamental way, your futures are tied. You promised that to each other, and you promised it in front of other people. I belong to my wife in a way that's very practical. We own a house together. Our names are on the deed. We run that house together. We raise children together, and I belong to all of them just as much as they belong to me. I belong to my neighbors across the street, next door, to my left and right. They're all lawyers. And I don't mean if any of you are a lawyer, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just pleased that they allowed me to integrate the neighborhood and allowed a non-lawyer to move in. But we watch out for each other. We have shared joys and sorrows, funerals, health crises, the arrival of children and grandchildren. We belong to each other, even if we might never say so. We are enmeshed in each other's lives. I belong, in the way that we use that word in English, to my church. Those are my people. My wonderful, multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multi-racial, totally accidental, and only slightly dysfunctional family. I give my money, I give my time, and an incalculable emotional payment to that place, year in and year out. I didn't have to pass a test to get in. The promises that made me a member weren't even made by me. They were made for me, and I was only a couple of weeks old. If I stopped going, people would ask where I was. But it is, after all, if you think about it, a completely voluntary obligation. I mean, is somebody going to say that you can't have your membership card anymore if you decide not to go? Think about the nature of belonging in the 21st century. We may show up, be seen, even to some degree known in digital spaces. How many of you are on a social media platform where you have hundreds of friends? Are they your friends? I mean, some of them are your friends. Some of you are probably Facebook friends with each other who are sitting here in these chairs. But really, the other day, somebody asked to be my friend. I hit sure, go ahead, and it said, no, you can't have any more friends. So I thought, I've reached my limit. I got to get rid of some friends. So you hit this other key, and it says, well, here are the people that you rarely interact with. And I didn't even know who they were. So they were out. Don't tell them. They're just not my friends anymore. The still new world of the web creates a kind of instant familiarity that's easily achieved and easily discarded. Like-minded individuals who share a hobby, maybe they like Japanese anime, or they like kung fu movies, or they like hiking, or whatever they like. It's so easy to find each other now. You just go to Google and put that in, and you find them. But the members have very little allegiance to each other. They don't really know each other. The requirements for belonging are minimal at the front door, so minimal as to be insubstantial. Algorithms now make them come looking for you. They know you want to be found by them even before you do. But what makes you stick long term, and what makes you ready to be publicly aligned to this thing that you do? When my daughter went away to college, she was part of a religious group on campus, and somebody she knew from another class or another context saw her leaving the meeting on Sunday night, and the person said to her, "You're religious? But you're so smart." Terrible, terrible. She called me up after. She couldn't believe it either. But isn't that the reaction that you would get? Maybe not to your face, but isn't that the reaction you might get from some of your workmates? People you know, where you live? You're religious? How could you be religious? You're smart. You're like a regular person. How could you be religious? So let's think about what sticking for the long term really means in an era of easy allegiance, weak social bonds, weak affiliation, weak obligation. What might a long-term, more nourishing relationship look like? Is there something that would be demanded of you that you're just not ready to give? You know, when you were kids, you learned the creeds. That was part of the deal, right? You had to memorize them. Even if you didn't know what every phrase in the creeds meant, you had to memorize them. You were expected to learn the words and to recite them. And there was a belief, I think, that if you said them long enough, you would believe what they said. Like eventually it would sink in and you'd not only remember the words, but you'd even know what they meant, and then you'd believe it. Across the board, people have lost the knack for simply taking the word of big institutions that say, "This is the truth, so trust me." Hardly alone among religious institutions, but often in a 1,000-watt light, because it is, after all, the largest single religious group in the United States, the Roman Catholic Church and the tens of millions of faithful have had a pretty tough 35 years. As time and again, it was revealed that people who said, "Just trust me," couldn't be trusted. It's been a time of testing, of trial, of shattered faith, large numbers falling away. It's hard to know how many would have found something else to do on Sunday morning anyway, even absent the sin that came to light. But the two things happened at the same time, so it's hard to figure out which one was most high impact. Back to the creeds. Do you have to believe every word in them all the time? This is a tough question for adults who are out in the world, mixing with people who are not the same faith, mixing with people of no faith at all, which is increasingly your experience in the United States. how much do you have to say to yourself, I have to believe all of this all the time or else I'm out? There are people who can say, never had any doubt, never had a minute of doubt ever, so I'm good. It's probably not all of us. Sometimes it's the doubt that keeps you coming as you wrestle, as you try to work it out. You may test the purity like a precious metals expert pouring a little arsenic onto a gold sample to check its purity. Turn it over in your hand like an antiques appraiser trying to look over a precious relic. I flew all the way here from Washington this afternoon to tell you that's okay. It's okay. The lifelong journey of figuring out what you believe and how and why you believe it is a restless enterprise that never stands still. You are going to bump up against people who believe different things at different levels of conviction for different reasons, and it's all okay. It has to be okay in a pluralistic country with so many influences like our country has. You are not exactly who you were when you were 15, and you are not at this moment who you'll be when you're 45. And though it pains me to say it, I'm 68, and I'm not who I was when I was 15 or 30 or 45. Maybe you haven't had your heart broken yet. Maybe you haven't had a crisis of faith yet. Maybe you haven't gone wandering and then found your way back yet. Everybody's timeline is different. Everybody's reasons for being inside are different. Just as where you'll end up might share some of the fundamentals and yet be somewhat different. We all have things to offer each other, to say to each other, to learn from each other. I'm not a theologian. That's not why Alejandro invited me this week. I'm a pretty ordinary, workaday Christian who's thrilled when some readings come around in the cycle of readings, and there are parts of the Bible, even now after hearing them countless times, make a beeline straight for my head and for my heart, even though I'm not always sure every minute of every year what I believe or why. I now understand more than ever how much human beings really need each other's company. I've often heard and I've spoken to people who say, yes, I grew up in the church, but now I don't need organized religion. Being out in nature is my church. And you'll hear this, I take my dog for long walks. Or sharing a meal with friends gets me to those same places. Okay. I mean, to quote our late Pope, who am I to judge? But there was a reason early Christians perfected the model that they did, and it wasn't just to make sure that there would continue to be little Christians. It's because the set of teaching and ideas about the world that early Christians didn't even call a religion. They just called it the way. That the way was not meant to be practiced in isolation. Maybe that's okay for some desert fathers or hermit monks, but Jesus lived in the real, material, sensual world, the lived experience of touch. How did he heal people? He touched them. He spit on his fingers to make a paste out of dirt to put on somebody's eyes. He talked about salt, tangy salt that hadn't yet lost its flavor, about dirty, tired feet, people who fall short of faithfulness in marriage, people who fall short in their dealings between bosses and workers, of experiencing fabulously generous anointing that runs down your face and onto your beard. For those of you who will never have a beard, trust me, that's quite a feeling to have that stuff running down your face. My son came to church with me his whole life. And then when he moved away and came back here to Chicago to go to college, he continued to go to church every week still. And after he graduated, he told me one day that he didn't think there was a God, but he loved Jesus and he loved going to church. And he still wanted to continue to do both. That was a hard thing to hear. It's a really hard thing to hear. His son, my first grandchild, was born earlier this year. He was born in New York because my son and his still new wife weren't sure they wanted to deliver in China where they live. I knew they would be with us in America only for a few months before heading back to Shanghai, and I asked my son quietly on the side during a family gathering whether my grandson was going to get on that plane and go to Shanghai already baptized or not, because baptism is not that easy to come by in China. My daughter-in-law is an adult convert, a member of a below-the-radar, not quite legal religious movement. I wasn't sure what my son's answer was going to be. He said, "Oh, I want to do it. But Shanshan isn't sure she wants it." I said, "Well, hold on. You're the agnostic. She's the believer. How come you're saying yes and she's saying she's not sure?" I was shocked. He said, "Well, she's not sure she believes in infant baptism." Oh, I said, "Tell her it's our family's custom and see if she goes for that. Tell her that the boy's grandfather and incidentally great-grandfather would be very happy. And even the boy's stateside grandmother, my Jewish wife, would be pleased if that could happen before they got on the plane to go back." And then I hinted to him that if it didn't happen, during one of my annual visits to Shanghai to see them, when we were babysitting, I would baptize him in the kitchen sink. I remembered all the prayers to consecrate water. There was olive oil in the cupboard. And yes, it would be an emergency. And I said it in a way that he thought, well, maybe he's kidding and maybe he's not. The entire Suarez clan gathered from all up and down the East Coast. Shanshan's friends from China and Taiwan and Singapore were all on hand in New York for the joyous occasion. We human beings love ritual. And that gathering earlier this year was a reminder of why. It's the mystical bond of what we can mean to each other made real, made physical. Some of my nieces and nephews are not churchgoers, but they remarked on how much they loved being there that day. If I went to every one of the individuals in that crowded chapel, they might have had a very different explanation for just what we were doing with this beautiful, sleeping, cute as anything, 2-month-old in a baptism gown worn by every member of the family for the last 60 years. Some would have attached no importance to it at all as an actual thing that had to get done. But they understood that bringing this perfect and innocent little boy into our thing, ritually having him die to sin, was important, even if they all had a different version of why it was important. So keep that in mind as you make decisions going forward about the public self, the private self, how much of yourself you show to others, and how much of yourself you feel comfortable showing to others. Part of what got us through 2,000 years as a movement, as a way of life, was being able to figure out the public and the private, the personal and the shared, and to insist that the church is something more than just a club of nice people. If it was just the club of nice people, we never would have made it for 2,000 years. There's got to be something else involved, and that may help you figure out how public and how private you are ready to be with your own faith, and how much of it you're willing to show to others, and how public you are about what this means to you. Because in a secular, pluralistic society, in the secular workplaces that you get up and go to every day, if you start preaching or sprinkling people with holy water, probably not going to go great with HR. The conversation's probably not going to be great with HR, but there is a way for you to model who you are and for people to know that's why you are who you are. That will make sense in your context, that will feel genuine and real to you, not feel fake or overdone or inauthentic, and still be okay with all the people, all the associations you have in your life that are not church, that are not religious, that are meant to be secular. One of the things that makes our thing still a success after all this time is the simple grace of being known, of walking through the door and having some confidence that people there know about you and care about you. A lot of young people, maybe a lot of them are your friends, people you know, your own neighbors, members of your family, will say, I'm not religious, I'm really more spiritual. I don't really know what that means. As a person who's really religious but not particularly spiritual, I don't really understand what it means. But every year I give a talk at my church as part of an Advent speakers series. And I've been giving these talks for almost 30 years now, and I usually have a full house, and I'm not bragging, it's just the way it is. Just a few years ago, I was discussing the nuts and bolts of my diagnosis and treatment for cancer, and how the disease can really rock you to your foundations, make you think about what your life means, what it's for, what it would mean for you to die, who that would affect, and what your family would be without you, all of those things. And after I was finished with the talk, and after I was finished with the Q&A, and got kind applause, my priest, an old friend, asked me if I would stay for a blessing, and I assumed that he would pray for my continued recovery and such, and then I would sit down. But not this Sunday. Instead, he asked the members of the congregation to come up, lay their hands on me with his, and to send me home with everyone's blessing. And I tend to be a pretty rational, not particularly emotional member of the church. And I was shocked at how moved I was by this outpouring of love and care and affection from my people. My wife, who doesn't come, happened to be along this week because of the topic of that week's talk. And afterwards, we were in the car on our way home, and she had watched that happen. And she said, well, what was that like for you? And I told her how shocked I was by my reaction to it. Cheered, encouraged, cared about, lifted up, loved, all things that she supplied for me. That was not what I was getting at. That she was doing her job, getting the patient to the finish line. But these were my other people. And it reminded me that congregational life is not a solitary walk in nature, and it's not dinner with friends. We weep for each other's losses and we have delight at each other's wins. Ideally, we can be who we really are with these people that we accidentally come through the front door with year after year. To pray and to worry and to doubt and to inquire and to wonder. We need to rub up against each other to do all those things in order not to be comfortable, but to be unashamed about being a little dented, a little scratched up, because these are the natural things that come along with living in a complicated world. Christian belief is not a calculator where you feed in data at one end and just get out the same answers for everybody at the other end. Calculators do that. Life in the church does not do that. Sometimes in our lives, things don't add up, even when we think we're doing everything right. Unfair setbacks occur. The saints in our lives get way too much grief, while outrageous sinners skate and lie and break the rules and seem to just go on to be able to do it again. It's not a calculator where the bad get bad things to happen to them and the good get good things to happen to them. You may be irritated at something you hear in a sermon that's just too neat, too pat, that doesn't seem to be adequately getting at the things you already see that aren't adding up in your workplace or your city or your family. That's where habit comes in. And I want to talk to you a little about habit before I stop talking and hear your questions. In English, we're taught to look down on habit. Habits, what do you do with habits? You break habits. You get rid of habits. Smoking or eating too much candy or interrupting other people while they're talking. Oh, that's a bad habit. You have to stop doing that. And of course, here in Chicago, in that classic rock thunder ballad Peter Cetera sings to his love, "You're a hard habit to break." But the great mystery of the church is built on granite blocks of habit. How many of you in this audience, and I won't make you raise your hand because that would be unfair, can honestly say that every week that you go to church, you spring out of bed and happily get dressed while whistling a happy tune and rush off to Mass because you definitely want to be there? I mean, if you are one of those people, good for you. The rest of us aren't like that. Sometimes it's just habit that gets us out the door, but don't be apologetic about that for a second. It is the practice of hundreds of millions of people that gives this thing its enormous power. You've heard the parable of the Good Samaritan before. You'll hear it again. Sacrificial love didn't mean much to me as a 12-year-old altar boy, but it sure means a lot to me now after 45 years of being married. The story of Job was kind of interesting and provocative and frankly a little weird. God and Satan having a conversation and making a bet about whether they could break Job's spirit. It didn't mean much to me in my 20s. But now that I'm knocking at the door of 70, it means a lot to me. And the prospect of losing everything the way Job did. I sat in church one Sunday and heard the story of Job being read from the front of the church, and it was like, bingo! All of it made sense to me. And I had been hearing that story my entire life. Habit gets you there. But it's being there week in and week out that gives you the chance of hearing something unexpected, suddenly, that has deep value and significance. Care for others is a habit. Kindness, is a habit. The emotional muscles built and flexed by congregational life is deeply tied to habit. There's no apology necessary if the only thing that got you out of bed on Sunday is habit. Habit's okay. They knew it in the catacombs, they knew it in the basilicas of Europe, and the newest Christian communities in the New World, they all knew habit works. It's deeply built into the structure of the church. Doubt is okay. It's even essential in my view. And, I have to apologize to Alejandro. I'm not an authorized spokesman for the Archdiocese of Chicago. I can tell you as an individual layman, doubt is okay. It's a vital test of what you've been taught. It's the fire that burns away the impurities, leaving what's precious behind. I don't mean the kind of doubt that you have on Wednesday that gets cleared up by Friday. I mean the serious doubt. The wrestling you may do for years before you land, as the old Shaker hymn says, in the place just right. So, there may be some things about this thing that we're doing together that you just don't buy. I'm here to tell you that's okay. Is that okay, Alejandro? Okay, I did it anyway. Believing all of it, all of the time, is perhaps the fortune of the few, and if you have it, God bless you. I know we are urged in Scripture to be perfect, even if as your Father in heaven is perfect. It's not a great slogan to build a movement around, because we're doing it right when we're clear with ourselves and clear with each other about our continuing imperfection. That we're willing to work at this and keep at it and continue to walk together, this ceaseless long walk, and do it for the duration. We just have to back off this idea that you have to be totally right there with every part of it all the time, every year, every week. Bring your doubt to church. Bring your brokenness to church. Bring who you are on Sunday to the rest of your week with your workmates and your neighbors and your friends. You are a complicated person living a complicated life in a complicated country at a complicated time. That doesn't mean that you're going to be a preacher, but it means that people will know what the way is about, or they may know what the way is about by looking at the way you live. That's as public as you have to be with this. And you have to be comfortable with the notion that we're all kind of limping along. And even the saints had doubts. Thanks a lot. It was great to be with you today.
Let's give Ray a round of applause. Thank you so much.